you would have heard us mention a few times across the tour the City of London Corporation and the Lord Mayor. And this is the stop where we get to find out who they are and what they do. So that sort of Star Wars inspired building over there is the City of London Corporation headquarters. And the corporation is the body that runs the City of London. Now, the first thing to be said about the corporation is that nobody actually knows how old it is. And that's because there's literally no record of it ever coming into existence. But what we do know is that it was already here when William the Conqueror came to Britain in 1066. And it was already powerful enough at that stage to strike a deal with William, meaning that the corporation retained control of the City of London, whereas William got control of the rest of the country. And that means the City of London Corporation is the oldest continuous government body on the planet. And today it's counted as one of London's local authorities, or one of the boroughs, but it's one with a few differences from your average borough, because it has its own laws, its own police force, its own court and prison cells where they held the suffragette Emily Pankhurst, and it has its own mayor. And as we're going to see now, well, in a minute, yeah, not Boris Johnson, who is the mayor of London. And yeah, and it also has its own elections. Now, first we're going to have a look at what a Lord Mayor does and how a Lord Mayor is different from the Mayor of London. So here is a description from the corporation website. The Lord Mayor of London's principal role today is as ambassador for all UK-based financial and professional services. The position is unpaid and apolitical. The Lord Mayor spends some 90 days promoting the city abroad and addresses in the region of 10,000 people each month, making around 700 speeches a year. The Lord Mayor also hosts a large number of visits by important foreign political and business figures. Another key aspect of the Lord Mayor's role is to advise the government on the views of the city businesses. Does that sound like the role of a local government body to anyone? And so here we're going to look at another way that things here are slightly different from the rest of London and the rest of the world, actually, with the Occupy London Tour's guide to the city elections, how to become Lord Mayor. So to be Lord Mayor, there are several requirements. You have to be very rich, because you have to be paid no salary and finance your own banquets, travel around the world giving speeches. But you also have to be a sheriff. Of course you do. You've got to be a sheriff of the City of London to be eligible to stand to be Lord Mayor. Now, how do you become a sheriff? Well, of course, you need to be an alderman before you become a sheriff, obviously, and that's what an alderman looks like. Now, how do you become an alderman? You can't just apply on Gumtree, I want to become an alderman, please. You have to be elected onto the Court of Aldermen, but to run for election, you have to be a freeman of the City of London, right? Now, there are two ways you can get freeman status. They're always called freemen, and they usually are men. And all of the Lord Mayors, apart from 2 out of 690, have been men also. It's not a very female-friendly place. I should have warned you in advance, actually. So there are 2 ways you can become a freeman. One is that you're already an alderman, you're elected onto the Court of Aldermen, so that's not very useful if you're trying to become a freeman from scratch. The other way is you have to be a member of one of the worshipful livery companies of the City of London. These are basically the remnants of the medieval guilds of the city, which used to come and meet here at Guildhall. And those include, by the way, still to this day, the Worshipful Company of Fletchers, the arrow makers, the armours and braziers, the hackney carriage drivers, so the cabbies, and the Worshipful Company of Tax Advisors. Very handy here in the City of London. Now, these are pretty hard to get into. But anyway, supposing you do manage to get that freeman status, so you can become an alderman and then become a sheriff and then become Lord Mayor, you have to get yourself elected, right, onto the Court of Aldermen. This is where things get a bit strange. because most of the votes in City of London elections don't go to people at all, they go to corporations. And the bigger the corporation, the more votes they get in the elections. These are corporations that are based here in the City of London. So a quarter of the votes go to the 11,000 or so people who live here. And every year companies like Goldman Sachs, the Bank of China, Moscow Narodny Bank are voting in British elections. But the Lord Mayor, and this is a very, very crude diagram that shows the sort of hierarchy of the elections. But the Lord Mayor is not voted for by that electorate at all. Presumably that would be taking democracy way too far. So what they've done instead is they've got the heads of these medieval guilds, the livery companies, to do a show of hands on Michaelmas, 29th of September every year.
The day that some of you may remember used to be when the Folkemot got together. Back
Exactly.
before there was a slightly less democratic.
Yeah, when there was a General Assembly of the People back in the 14th century, that is just too old-fashioned now. So, does anyone think this sounds a bit strange?
Yeah.
A little bit. And basically there's nothing like it anywhere in the world. When an expert on the corporation, Maurice Glassman, looked for parallels, the closest thing he could find were the rights given to slave owners in the American South. And other than that, there just wasn't anything even merely comparable to these guys. Now, you might still be thinking, well, so what? You know, they have their medieval system. Who cares? Why does it matter to us, ordinary people? But it's important because of the corporation's role as a major lobbying institution. And that voting system means that the corporation can more or less predict the kind of people that will be staffing it and pushing its policies, which will be people that represent or usually come from the big businesses, the banks and the insurance companies that are based here in the City of London and give the city most of its business. Now, to do that lobbying, as well as the Lord Mayor schmoozing his way around the world giving speeches, they actually have an unelected representative in Parliament called the Remembrancer, who has sat in Parliament since 1571, not the same geezer, but there always has been a Remembrancer there. And his role, and it's always been a him, returning to your point earlier, is to basically listen out for any legislation that might threaten the businesses in the City of London and to report back to the City of London Corporation with what he's heard. And then the corporation gets on with the lobbying, which we're going to discuss at our next stop where we visit their main lobbying organisation. But just before we do, I want to talk about some British politicians who have actually thought, you know, this system is kind of a threat to our democracy, or it represents a stain on our democracy. So the Labour Party, through most of their history, have had a pledge in their manifesto to abolish the corporation completely. But that pledge was turned into a reform by good old Tony Blair back in 1996. Now, most people thinking that, you know, this is a Labour Prime Minister, this is going to be a progressive reform, bringing more democracy. Does anyone know what the reform was in the end, when it was passed? He expanded the business vote in the elections by another third, and that was it. So it appears the power of the City of London Corporation today is as strong as it's ever been in its 1,000 or more years of history. And we'll be looking at the effects of that at our next stop.